Welcome to Metaphysical Life Support, a place to learn about the subtle and profound effects of metaphysics in our life. This show is about exploration, tools, and the people who live in awareness, supporting and inspiring us all to live with and from our source, empowering ourselves to manifest consciously and encouraging us to have compassion and a sense of humor about being human. Our guest today is Rosie Potestio. Thank you for coming back. We had so much fun with you.
Yes.
And so part of your work as a storyteller and a spiritual director and a teacher is you have taken some classic stories and created classes around them, and tell us about that.
Well, as a spiritual director, as a teacher, I'm always looking for areas that will help jumpstart people's journey to become more conscious in their own life. And different things attract different people. So the more I can bring in, and stories are a wonderful way to do it. One of these archetypal stories that we know and love as children, they have amazing knowledge for us as adults. It's kind of like, whoa, that's something very good to think about. So I took the very first book of The Wizard of Oz and created two consecutive workshops on it. And we read the book together, and then we would pull out pieces that jumped out at us and going, oh, here's really great meat. Let's talk about that. You wanted to say something?
I did. For some of us who were brought up in the TV era, there's actually a whole series of books that are by
L. Frank Baum.
And The Wizard of Oz is the first in a series of like 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm.
And they're intriguing. And this was written at a time when spiritualism was on the rise. And so whether or not he intended it, I don't know. But there is a lot of interesting meat and food for thought in these books. So back to you.
Okay.
What are some of the points that you think worth making?
On the very first page, first of all, I wanted to say that the movie, the 1939 movie with Judy Garland, was taken from the first book, and it is a wonderful movie. But it is a little different from the book. The book is grittier, and it's got a lot more information in it, like, of course, books do. They have to. On the very first page, there is a wonderful point. It starts out with Kansas, 1900, and Kansas is a world of gray. Everything is sun-bleached. Everything is gray. The people are gray. The buildings are gray. The ground is gray. Everything is gray except Dorothy.
Well, and from a factual point of view, having come from the Midwest, after harvest time, when the tornadoes are coming and the storms are coming and everything's harvested, it can be a pretty bleak landscape. So he's got some realism there.
Yes, and it was a time of depression in the Midwest. And so the very first page, it talks about Dorothy was not gray. Dorothy had joy in her life because of her dog Toto. She loved her dog, and her dog loved her.
So it's not a coincidence that dog and God spelled the opposite?
Not a coincidence. Not at all. So here was the first thing that we talked about. What brings you joy and why? And we talked really early in our first sessions together about what brings you joy. And here again we have it. Talk about, here's your full circle. What brings you joy? And so as a class, we had these wonderful discussions about the things that bring us joy. What brings you joy?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yes.
Having
conversations that are meaningful, that get to the heart of the matter, cooking for people I love. Cleaning never brings me joy. Art brings me joy. My people I love, my tribe, my son, usually people in communication and or some form of my heart and soul going into the world.
So discussing this as a group, and I think we had about 25 people in the group at that point. So discussing it in group, you have this wonderful just building. Oh yeah, that brings, I forgot about, that brings me joy.
Okay, so this goes to the whole idea that talking, questioning, helps us to expand our ideas about who we are and what we can do, what our gifts might even be.
Correct. I love Marianne Williamson's saying, she says, go deep or go home. And I too love getting together with people and talking, but as an introvert, I really want to go deep.
Which is why, as an extrovert who loves deep conversation, a vast majority of my friends are introverts.
That's great. Let's see, what was another one? Oh, yes, this is really quite wonderful. So Dorothy, she's in the house with her dog, and the tornado picks up the house, and it's a long journey in the tornado to the land of Oz. And she gets tired, and so she goes over to the corner and she lies down in her bed and she takes a nap.
When you were telling me earlier, you were describing the hubbub, the chaos in the house around her.
Mm-hmm.
And we equated that to the chaos of life and the spiritual journey of going from the mundane, recognizing something's too alive inside of you to stay mundane. And that's a rocky path to the realization, and there's always more to realize.
Exactly.
But to even begin the process or the experience of waking some of that up. So the rockiness of it is in this book too. Can you talk about the grit of it?
Stop and nourish yourself. You know, it is, on one level, it's frightening. As an adult, we look at it as being very frightening. She approaches it from a perspective of, I have no choice. I am stuck in this house.
So in the book, she's nourishing herself by napping, and what else?
Well, after the house lands, and of course kills the Wicked Witch of the East, and Glenda, the good witch of the North, comes and says, well, what you need to do is you need to go on the yellow brick road to find the wizard, and he can get you back to Kansas. Well, in order to go on the yellow brick road, she goes back into the house, and she changes her dress, and she puts on a clean apron, and she takes her little basket, and she puts food in it. And then she looks at in the book, the slippers are silver. And she puts on these slippers that had been the witches. And now she's ready to go. She has prepared herself for the journey. What do we need to prepare ourselves for the journey? We need to nourish ourselves first. We need to sleep. We need to nourish ourselves on so many levels. And then we need to prepare. Do we have sufficient food? Do we have what we need for that journey? So all these lessons reminding us to take care of self first.
You know, it's interesting also because in one of our previous conversations, you talked about starting your spiritual journey and then your son. What more lively thing than your son?
Mm-hmm.
What more connection to the divine? And then that waking up process going back into a nourishing home process.
Right.
And then coming back out of that nourishing home process with a husband and a house and things settled in a way that it was more doable.
Right.
So I like the way that these all tie into the reality of a spiritual journey. So go on.
Okay. So yes, and that's the wonderful thing about this type of story. When we really look at it, it has something to tell us. So we need to be prepared. We need to take care of ourselves, and we need to be prepared. Have the tools that we need that's a whole another conversation right there. Our tools. So now she goes along the yellow brick road, and of course she meets the scarecrow who wants a brain, and she meets the tin woodsman who wants a heart, and she meets the cowardly lion who wants courage. And the cowardly lion talks about people say who people say he is, and they say he's a coward. And so he assumes that. And yet, as the story goes on, we see this cowardly lion being brave and protecting his new friends. We see the scarecrow, who thinks he has no brains, being smart and coming up with plans to overcome obstacles on their path. We see the tin woodsman, who thinks he has no heart. He has no physical heart. And yet he's the first one to love and to have compassion. On the journey, he sees ants going across the yellow brick road, and he's very careful not to step on them. He has a very large heart, even though he doesn't have a physical heart in his metal body. So who do people think you are?
So now we go into the whole metaphysical idea of how important is the physical when you have the metaphysical. You know, he has this metaphysical heart. They have this metaphysical courage. These things exist in who they are. They exist in their soul, but their mind hasn't related them, and they haven't manifest in the world for themselves to see, but other people see it, which goes back to the conversation about what are our gifts. We don't see our own gifts sometimes.
Right.
And so what I'd like to do is come back in another segment and talk more about this, because we have just begun.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Naomi Eklund. You, the audience, I want to thank you for joining us on Metaphysical Life Support. Our purpose is to provide thoughtful and practical ways to explore the metaphysical reality of your life, to see where life starts in our most powerful journey toward manifesting the strength of our soul on this earth.